It's amazing, myself and Mrs. W have been gardening for some years now. And it never ceases to amaze me how I learn something new every single growing season. The courgettes that you're looking at here, they look the best that we've ever grown. Normally these are caked in white powder. The leaves are dying off. And yes, there is a bit of white powdery mildew coming on them, but nothing that's going to threaten the plant. They've produced so many courgettes this year, especially the green. The yellow have been good too, but the green especially, they just keep on giving. In fact, we've given several away.
We have.
And, you know, I've said quite a few times over the year that, you know, there is only just myself and Mrs. W. And I've seen many people that grow rows of courgettes. You don't need rows. 2 plants will more than suffice a family of 4. Hence why we're giving so many away. Now in today's video, we need to do some seed sowing because we want to keep those harvests going all the way through the rest of summer and into autumn. Hello and welcome back to our No Dig Norfolk garden. Now, one of my favourite sayings, and I've said many times, is that you always need to have plants ready. Because actually, even if you don't use them, they make wonderful compost anyway. But if you do have them ready, then as soon as ground becomes available, you've got something that you can plant in there. One of the things that myself and Mrs. W really enjoy during the autumn period are turnips. But not the big woody ones that you associate turnip with, and many people do. I think I don't like those. We grow a variety called Tokyo Cross. And they only get about that big, don't they?
So golf ball size is the nice size to have them, I think.
Oh yes. They remain lovely and tender and are great in casseroles, autumn salads. And you can see here, we sowed some last month. We're about to put those into some available ground that we now have ready.
They're multi-sown ones, aren't they?
They are multi-sown, Mrs. W. You are quite right. But what we now need to do is to do the succession sowing. It won't take long before these become ready. Once I plant these in the ground, we'll probably be eating these toward the back end of September. These ones we're now going to sow, hopefully October and early November. And as Mrs. W quite rightly pointed out, we multi-sow these. Look how small the seed is.
They're tiny, aren't they?
And I'm aiming for 4 to 5 seeds. And the beauty about multi-sowing is that you can twist the larger ones out, leaving the rest to grow on. It's always an eating fest in here. Every time that camera goes down, Mrs. W's picking tomatoes and eating them.
I've got a little row here ready, just to snack on.
Now these are spinach seeds. And I do like to sow our spinach round about mid-August. Part of the reason for that is because they don't tend to rise to flower and bolt, whereas if you sow them a little bit earlier, they're quite likely to. But from a sowing now in mid-August, we've found that we can start harvesting in October. So we get some nice harvest during October and early November. before the weather does get really cold here in our New Dig Norfolk garden. And then they'll sort of go into a nice little sleep. And then in February, the following year, as the temperatures start to rise again and the daylight starts to lengthen a bit more, they come into production once again. And you get February, March, April, May, June, some lovely harvests of spinach. Whereas if you follow the packet advice sometimes and sow them sort of March time, by the time you've planted them out, it will be April. You've only got May, and then June. June is its time when it actually wants to send up a flower stalk. So that's the reason why myself and Mrs. W do this. And when I sow these, I look to sow 2 seeds per cell. And that gives us 2 plants. They both go in together. And of course, you get some nice harvest from every 2 plants that we actually transplant into the ground. Now, spinach is quite happy growing outside. It overwinters really well, so if you don't have an undercover growing space, that's fine. You can just grow them outside. For us, we do actually grow them. We grew them in the greenhouse last year, didn't we? But yes. I'm going to put them in the polytunnel this year to see how they go, because I think it would be a bit cooler in here.
Yes.
So at times of the year when you're struggling to get some nice green leaves, spinach is one of those things that you can rely on. It will give you those nice fresh green leaves that you can add to your salads. Now the next thing I'm going to sow is some Lollo Rossa. It'll be the last time that these get sown this year. I'm also going to do some more little gem, and you're going to actually be sowing some salad bowl, aren't you?
Yes, yeah.
And that's a lovely cut and come again lettuce. We probably won't sow it until toward the end of August, so it can grow away, and then we can take it down closer to the house where it might be a bit warmer. We can actually put it inside the house if we need to, if the weather is going to be inclement. And as I say, it's a cut and come. You just take the leaves as and when they appear, and we find it harvest for sort of 8 to 12 weeks, don't we?
Yes, yeah. So it's a really good cropper, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, just have it in a pot, and as you say, if we get any cold weather or anything like that, any frosts come along early, we can always move it in.
Yeah. Next thing we're going to do is sow some endive. And we've been enjoying this most of the way through the year, haven't we? But the one thing I have learnt is that the endive that we sowed, towards the end of June, they just raised to flower, didn't they?
And they're quite an unusual purpley colour flower, which I was quite surprised about. Quite
yeah,
pretty
they're very
flower.
pretty. Yeah, very pretty, weren't they?
But they weren't happy to sit and produce. They wanted, well, they did. They wanted to produce seed. They didn't want to produce leaves.
No. So this is the pak choi yushu, which many of you have asked me about. And these probably went in about 4 weeks ago, maybe 5.
Ground, yes, yeah.
And you can see they're making some really lovely plants. And then underneath the bench where I'm actually sowing, Mrs. W has put these plants in. Well, she put them in today actually, but they from a sowing from last month. And what I'm doing now is just to sow the next lot. We do like a nice stir fry, and of course
that's super. They're so nice and crisp, and they keep well. They stand in the ground quite well.
Oh yes, they are amazing, aren't they? They really are. Give as you say, a really nice crunch. And I know, forgive me, I can't think of your name, but somebody did ask me about when you should be sowing Chinese cabbage. Now, I hadn't planned to do Chinese cabbage. It's something I would like to have a go again with. We have grown it before. We've grown it successfully outside, but they do seem to come ready all at the same time, don't they?
Yes.
And then they rise to flower.
Yeah.
So we've enjoyed 2 or 3 out of the row, but then the others just we weren't able to eat. And I would like to actually put some into this polytunnel at some point. Because of the plants we have in here now, I don't actually really have the room to do that. But in next year's plan that I do, I shall plan to have some Chinese cabbage in here. So look out for that. I know it's still a year away because it will be this time next year when we sow it. But if you're looking to sow any oriental veg, now is the time to do it. They do like the cooler conditions. You sow them now and they'll go out in 4 weeks' time when the weather will be that little bit cooler. It's very hot here today, Mrs. W.
Oh, hasn't it been for the last few days?
30 degrees we've seen here in Norfolk.
Yes.
Now we are starting to get several melons.
At long last.
At long last, yes. But as I say to you, you do need to keep up with the side shooting. This has produced a melon, and you can see here it's probably going to produce some more flowers here. But there simply is not going to be enough time to be able to do anything with them, so we're going to stop that. So now that we've got to a point where we have 3 or 4 melons on each plant, I'm going to have the growing tips out. Those flowers, as lovely as they are, they don't even have melons on them yet, so they're simply not going to produce.
No, we've got into, it's like mid-August now, so we need the plants to put all the energy into the growing of the melon itself now.
Yeah, we just need to cut our losses really, don't we?
It's not been a complete disaster, but it's just not quite, I mean, there's quite a few coming on this one, isn't there?
There is.
And there's still time, if we, especially if, you know, weather conditions are with us, that we can get a nice little harvest still. So
Still hopeful,
I'm
Mrs.
ever
W.
hopeful.
Still hopeful. Now, the last thing I'm going to be sowing today is some spring onions, and these will be to overwinter, and we shall enjoy that harvest next April. Some will go outside, some will actually be here in the polytunnel, so that we get them just that little bit earlier. And we do multi-sow our spring onions. I try to aim for anywhere between 7 and 10 seeds really, and then you've got your bunch of onions. But equally, if you only want 1 or 2, you can just pick the largest from the bunch. Now these are a variety called Guardsman, and they overwinter really well. Really very well.
Yeah, they do.
These spring onions were sown in July. You can see they've come along really nicely, and they will complete our plantings for spring onions for 2024. These will go into the vegegar bed and complete the circle. We'll be enjoying these probably sometime in October. Probably much like you guys now. We have many, many beans that are ready for their harvest, which is great. And at this time of the year you can enjoy them fresh with your food. But then when you do get a glut, they actually freeze really well, and they give you some really nice veg to have. Well, later on in the year, even into next year, they do really freeze that well.
These are the Cobra French beans, aren't they?
These are Cobra, yeah, which is a climbing French bean. Hello, Poppy. Yeah, I know, I don't have time for a stroke at the moment. I'm harvesting, my dear. It's not a bad harvest, Mrs. W.
No, that's good.
And it's only the beginning. Do you know, I've missed another couple down here.
I know you have. I can see quite a few you've missed, actually.
You actually said, off camera, how you can go bean blind. And you really can.
You can.
And this is really how I like to pick them. Sort of this size.
Yeah. Before
They
they
haven't-
get any chance of being stringy or anything. They're just a slightly sweeter flavour when you harvest them smaller, aren't they?
They are. And you don't have the big bean in them.
Although I do like the big beans. Just to eat as a big bean. Raw.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way that I like to eat them.
Yeah.
When you look in your local store now and you see just how many beans you get for the price you have to pay, why wouldn't you grow your own? Of course, once these get in production, there'll be so many beans. Look at the masses of flowers that are on here. I'm only just harvesting the ones that are at the bottom of the plants. There's going to be so many. What do you do with them all? Well, as I said earlier, you could freeze them. But if you watch this video that's going to appear on your screen next, it's a lovely recipe for runner bean green chutney. We actually had some of that the other day that we made last year. Still lovely and fresh, isn't it?
Yeah, those beans are still beautiful.
It really is. It really is. Do have a great gardening week, won't you all? We shall see you on the next one.